Okay, start live stream. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Miywâcimo. We are streaming to YouTube live from fourth space, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, who are the caretakers for the lands and waters we are meeting on, for their teachings about the earth and our relations to it. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects in development here across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting. We welcome any comments in the chat if you're joining us there, and for those of you in the space, if you would like to participate at the end, just let us know and we'll bring a microphone over to you so that we can hear. But with that, and to start things off, it's very much my pleasure to hand it over to the Indigenous Events Coordinator with the Indigenous Directions Office, Aidan Kondo. Aidan, welcome back.
Thanks, Doug. G'day, everyone. Hello. My name is Aidan Kondo. I'm Mi'kmaq from the community of Keskabegia, and I'm going to be the moderating the event today, hosted by the Office of Indigenous Directions. But before we get started, I'd just like to invite the Senior Director of the Office of Indigenous Directions, Manon Tremblay, to give a few opening words and start this event.
Tanse kakio miyokisko minam sito miwâcimo e koyate speik Manon Tremblay sikason mina neheo iskunia muske kusakai kani kutnia chikepe hunani nete. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of Miywâcimo, a competition that showcases the research of Indigenous students. So Miywâcimo is a Cree word that means tell a good story, and this is exactly what we're looking forward to today. We want our student finalists to tell us in 4 minutes or less what makes their research compelling and how their research can have a positive impact on our communities. But first, to ground us in our own worldviews and to honor all those who have come before us and to lift up our finalists and our judges, we acknowledge the land that we stand on today. And so I'd like to acknowledge what an incredible honor and privilege it is to live, work, and play in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people. This land, Tiohtià:ke, is a historical gathering place for many Indigenous nations, and today is home to people from all over the world. My own family's journey has taken us from Treaty Number 6 territory to Tiohtià:ke, and I continue to look up to my Haudenosaunee brothers and sisters for guidance in my work as well as in my private life, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to learn from them. So I'm going to, at this point, bring it back to Aidan, and he will facilitate the presentation part of our event. Back to you, Aidan.
Thank you, Manon. So to start, we'll be introducing our judge panel. So Nicolas Renaud is an assistant professor in the First People Studies at Concordia University, where he is a member of the Indigenous Futures Research Center and associate member of the Loyola Sustainability Research Center. He is also a filmmaker and artist, making documentaries, experimental films, and installation work that has been shown in Canada and internationally since the 1990s. He is of mixed Indigenous and Quebecois heritage and is a member of the Huron-Wendat First Nation of Wendake. Dr. Sigwan Taverge is an assistant professor in the First People Studies and an assistant professor in the Linguistics Department. Her research interests are primarily in morphosyntax, focusing on Algonquin and Cartvellian languages. More specifically, she is interested in complex agreement systems, roots and structures of verbal stems. She also has a secondary research interest in semantics, specifically relating to modality and indexal shifting. Her work also focuses on language reclamation and documentation, particularly in her home community in Long Point First Nation. Ron Abrera has worked in the field of entrepreneurship and Indigenous community economic development for over 30 years. He has worked as a business service officer for the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, primarily writing business plans for local entrepreneurs and performing research duties for the community development and issues projects. He was named Executive Director of the Economic Development Agency in Ganawage in June 1990. As the director, he guided the development of both Aboriginal Capital Corporation and the employment of training agencies in Ganawage, and presented the RCAP in May 1993. He completed his MBA from Concordia in 1995 and has taught entrepreneurship at the John Molson School of Business since 2002. So thank you all for being here today. And we're looking forward to, I'm sure you're looking forward to the presentations as much as we are. So now I'd like to call on our first participant. Madeline Montgomery is a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta, originally from Treaty 7 territory, and is privileged to call the beautiful unceded traditional territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations her home. Madeline holds a bachelor's degree from the University of British Columbia in theater and psychology, and she is currently completing her master's in creative arts therapy's drama therapy option. Her research examines how drama, storytelling, and performance can be used as therapeutic interventions to support survivors of sexual trauma, and she is looking forward to bringing this practice home with her to the West Coast when she graduates this spring. The title of her presentation is Stories in Medicine, Drama Therapy for Survivors of Trauma. So please welcome Madeline to the stage.
As a theater person, I need a little setup. Can we hear okay? Okay. My name is Madeline Montgomery, and I am a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta, originally from Treaty 7 territory. And I would like to begin with a content warning as my research examines the healing of sexual trauma. The question that guided my research was, how can stories be used as a therapeutic agent to help women, two-spirits, and girls heal from sexual trauma? My answer was to create a group drama therapy program where survivors can come together as agents in each other's healing. Drama therapy is the intentional use of theater and drama to work towards therapeutic goals, and the way that I practice drama therapy is closely aligned with what Indigenous communities have known all along, that we hold pain in our bodies, that healing is holistic and happens in community, and that storytelling, song, dance, and all forms of creative expression are medicine. Miywâcimo means to tell a good story. So what does that mean, to tell a good story? When I work with clients who've experienced sexual violence, I ask them to think of a story that speaks to them. The story that spoke to me when doing my research was the story of Medusa, a character we know as a monster who lived in isolation, but whose story of survival and gift of self-protection is often overlooked. In my research, I sought out examples of how healing happens through story. And as drama therapists, we recognize that survivors of trauma need distance from their experiences. Stories give us the capacity to tell a fictional story about fictional characters who represent our own unspeakable experiences. They give us the safety and agency to share our most vulnerable parts through the container of a character and to work through difficult and dangerous material towards a future beyond our pain. It is through these stories that we find our strength and we make meaning of the things that happen to us that never should have happened to us. Now, I'd like to show you what this process can look like in action. If I, as a client, chose to use Medusa's story in my process of drama therapy, I would be asked to show how Medusa might have felt at different moments in her story with my body. So I might be asked to show how Medusa felt when she served as a priestess at Athena's temple, feeling fulfilled, living her purpose, living her life peacefully. I might also be asked to show how Medusa felt when she was assaulted by the god Poseidon. Now, what does this image say that words might not be able to capture? And what does it say that I, as a survivor, might not even be able to express in words? It can feel disempowering, isolating, or even shaming to have to disclose these parts of a story. But telling them through Medusa's character gives me the safety and agency to share as much or as little as I choose. It allows those in my circle of healing to witness my experience on a spiritual level without the danger of feeling triggered or re-traumatized. It speaks to an understanding that surpasses language and creates profound connections. Lastly, I might be asked to show with my body how Medusa used her petrifying gaze to protect herself. For someone whose relationship with their body has been so dramatically altered, being able to experience power, control, a very clear and physical no, can be profoundly healing. This is what drama therapy has to offer us, and it speaks to what Indigenous communities have known all along. This healing happens in community, that it's holistic, and that stories are medicine. This research is happening in the context that 1/3 of Canadian women have experienced sexual assault outside of an intimate relationship, and Indigenous women report such instances at over 3 times the rate of non-Indigenous women. Now, these statistics only reflect the reported cases of sexual assault, so we can only imagine that this is just the tip of the iceberg. But I think part of the reason these statistics vary so greatly is because these stories are dangerous and vulnerable to tell. This is why I felt passionate about creating the Medusa Project, to create a space where stories can be shared safely and received compassionately, where the silence can be broken, and where survivors can come together to reauthor their endings. Thank you.
Hi, that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask, in the historical context, do participants in drama therapy, particularly Indigenous ones, go back as far back as they can go? Do they have to be inspired by an Indigenous person? I noticed you said Medusa. I have to confess I don't know too much about the stories of Medusa. So does the historical range go back from virtually yesterday to as far back as we can go, and is it relevant to have an Indigenous person do the inspiring?
In terms of the story that someone might choose in their process? Yeah. It really depends. I think that whatever story speaks to you is the one that's going to get you to where you need to be. In drama therapy, especially with cases of trauma, choice and control are paramount because those are things that were inherently lost during that experience. So yes, if an Indigenous story speaks to you, absolutely use that. And then it's my job as the therapist to be aware of what this story is, to do my own learning and to situate myself in my practice. I think that if a non-Indigenous story speaks to an Indigenous person, that can be equally as healing. It really just depends on who the person is and what story speaks to them, how they can work through that dangerous and difficult material and make sense of it. That's the most important piece to me in my practice.
I have a question. First of all, awesome. That was wonderful. And as someone who's, oh, sorry. Again, that was wonderful. You're great. But also as someone who loves theater and has theater training, I'm so curious about how you adapt this model for your practice. Is this something that's easily adaptable in like a one-on-one session, group session, private or public, like playback theater where people will reenact things? What has been your experience utilizing this method? Have you done all of these? I'm so curious.
Yes. So drama therapy isn't just one method. I work right now at a private practice where I see individual clients. Last year, I was at an internship where I worked with groups. So it is adaptable to any therapeutic setting that you might have. One thing that did attract me to drama therapy when I was choosing this program, this career, was the opportunity to bridge the gap between the private and the public. And for an issue like sexual violence and sexual assault, it's such a public issue that has to be experienced, or maybe is historically, contextually experienced privately. And bridging that gap between what my personal experience as a survivor might be and what the public perception of that is, I see so much opportunity there. It does create a lot of ethical questions that we have, like, is it ethical to put therapy on stage? Is it ethical to invite an audience in to witness this? How do we safeguard consent and all these tricky things? But I see so much potential there for this issue specifically, sexual violence, which I hope to spend the rest of my career working on.
Are there any other questions?
It's on. Okay. Hi. Just to be sure, information went fast at the beginning. So the program you're in is, what is the program you're in exactly?
My graduate program?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm doing a Master's of Creative Arts
Master's
Therapies.
Creative Arts. Okay.
And there's different options. There's music, art, and drama therapy, and I'm in the drama therapy program.
Okay. So what I was wondering is more specifically throughout your research, to your master's research, what do you envision that, what are you looking forward to really explore more that you haven't yet tapped into as much?
Well, actually, when I was proposing my research, I had a much bigger plan that my professors said, you need to trim this down. This is too much for right now. So I see this as just the first ripple in what I want to do with this project. Group drama therapy is something that can be molded to different, wherever I use it, right? So with Indigenous communities, it'll look different. With women, it looks different. With other groups, it looks different. So I'm hoping to kind of like hone my craft working with this population. And then eventually, the dream would be to use this group setting to create a performance together with survivors where they're able to bring their experience to the stage in something that is called either self-revelatory performance or group revelatory performance. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, this bridging the gap between the private and the public. There are examples of this happening, but very few. And the only example I have found in my research took place in India. So what this process would be working with survivors in a group drama therapy setting to devise a performance that doesn't present necessarily their experience of the trauma, but their process of healing. Because what you want to achieve is not the audience caring for the performers, but experiencing their healing with them. Right? So that they can see the transformation, that it's empowering for the people involved, everyone on either side, but also creates a level of empathy that just talking about the issue, discussing the statistics doesn't quite capture. Theater is an empathy generating machine. That's what I've said for so long. And that's why I really believe that it has so much power for healing, not just the person, but society.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask one last bit of question, I guess. I'm not quite sure if this is well articulated yet, but I'm more curious about the way that you invite people to take part in your project, because this is very difficult, a topic to talk about, and then also the drama part of it may also be difficult, because I'm a shy person, and I think a lot of people from my community are also shy. So like what kind of protocols do you have to go into a community and also invite people to actually take part?
Yeah.
These kinds of things, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in therapy in general, drama therapy specifically, consent is the first place we need to start. And so I would never ask anyone to do something they're not comfortable with, especially in a therapeutic setting. I talk a lot with all of my clients about what drama therapy is. It doesn't make sense, really. It's so kind of nebulous and unknown what it is unless you see it in action or do it yourself. The way I explain it to clients I work with, who for the most part don't want to do drama therapy, they ask for individual therapy. For context, I practice at a private psychotherapy practice. And I explain to them, I say that drama therapy is strengths-based, client-centered, and eclectic. And I'm interested in finding what works for you, not what works for me. So if that means sitting and talking for an hour, that's what we're gonna do. But there are ways that drama therapy weaves its way into this process, because the processes, yes, come from drama and theater, but are things that we do naturally every day. So speaking in metaphor, using our bodies to communicate. I'm doing it right now. It's so natural once you kind of like take down that barrier of like the drama theater of it, because I get it. Yes, I don't want to stand up and perform for my therapist. And kind of like getting over that hurdle is the first step. And then it's just about easing ourselves into the process, finding what works, and always asking for consent. You know, I check in with clients all the time. Take or leave this suggestion, but why don't we try this?
All right. Thank you, Madison. That was a wonderful presentation. Now for our second candidate, Ellen Dobrowolski is a member of the Métis Nation, BC, Northeast region located within Treaty 8 territory. She is a PhD student in the Department of Religions and Cultures at Concordia University in Jojage. She has received training in Indigenous studies and religious studies, and her research interests include Indigenous feminism and Indigenous traditions of religion and spirituality. Dobrowolski is currently working on a doctoral project that investigates historical representation of the ethno-religious identity of Sarah Riel, one of the first Métis Grey nuns and sister of famed Métis leader Louis Riel. The title of her presentation is "We Made the Church Our Relative, Métis Relationality and Religion."
Okay. So yes, the presentation needs to be up there, and I'm going to do my best work with the clicker. My first time using the clicker. I'm excited about that. Oh, no problem. I appreciate your skills. Thank you. Okay. And yes. Perfect. Okay. All right, everybody. Hello. As Aidan introduced me, I'm Ellen Dobrowolski. So I want to begin today by honoring the Métis cultural protocol of situating myself within the kinscapes that make up the Métis Nation. So my story begins with the McCarrans, you can see there, my grandmother and her sisters, who were born in Woodhill, Saskatchewan, with ancestral ties to Duck Lake, Fish Creek, and Fort Garry. So as these sisters grew, so too did their kinship network, as it incorporated other family names and extended outward across the Métis homeland. And while this is the story of my family specifically, it's also an example of how the Métis Nation was built and how it is maintained. For our kinscapes are constellations of connection, pulling together not just humans into this web of relations, but also animals, lands and waters, plants and medicines, and our more than human relations who guide and care for us. This relationality is part of the teaching of Włogotwin that we inherited from our maternal ancestors. And though Włogotwin is an essential part of Métis practices, for centuries non-Métis clergy and scholars have failed to recognize it as a part of the unique ways in which the Métis practice Christianity. Instead, they have represented our beliefs and practices as a degenerated form of Quebec Roman Catholicism, arguing that our Christianity is not worthy of study and is instead just evidence of our assimilation. So my research focuses on Sarah Riel, sister of famed leader Louis Riel, and the first Métis Grey nun missionary, and she serves as a case study for how Métis religion has been misunderstood and misrepresented generally. Riel is an important historical figure, living at a time of great political and social upheaval. She came from a well-known Métis family. She held important positions in religious and educational institutions in 2 prominent Métis settlements. And importantly, she left behind over 150 preserved samples of her personal writing. And yet, despite this, Sarah has all but been ignored in accounts of Métis history, being referenced only in footnotes or in relation to her more famous brother, making her an event in the life of a great man. In the few instances where Sarah has been the focus of study, non-Métis scholars have relied on the trope of mixed race ambivalence, projecting an uncertainty onto her cultural and religious identities, with one historian even suggesting that by choosing to become a grade nun, Sarah, quote, stood for everything her brother was fighting against. But we know that Sarah Riel was a part of kinscapes that these scholars do not understand. Sarah had ties to Métis settlements of Red River, St. Paul, and Île-à-la-Crosse, among others, and through those places she was connected by blood and kinship to many other Métis families. And she, like many or most other Métis people, made relations with religious orders as well. For Christianity is not just a heritage religion of recent settlers, but of our paternal ancestors too. Sarah also made spiritual relations when she became a godmother 4 times to different Métis Catholics, when she chose her religious name to honor her devotion to the Sacred Heart, and when she prayed for Saint Joseph to be recognized as the patron saint of the Métis Nation. By claiming these Christian figures as kin, Sarah and other Métis like her made them part of the kinscapes that make up our nation. Through the study of Métis religion, we can explore the role that religion plays in the expression and assertion of Métis nationhood and sovereignty. Centering relationality lets us understand both how the church first became a part of our kinscapes, and second, how we manage relatives who behave in ways that undermine kinship connections. It is important not to subscribe to colonial categories that position traditional and Christian beliefs as inherently incompatible, and refuse to acknowledge the ways that we, the Métis, make relations across those categories. As Sister Agnes, Sarah's superior, noted after Sarah Riel's funeral, People from everywhere came to pray from her body, for she was loved and respected as a métisse. My work on Sarah Riel aims to show that it is possible to honor all of our relations, and that by doing so, we resist colonial attempts to define who we are and who we can make our relatives. Thank you.
Thanks. It was a great presentation. So I really find it interesting, the idea of relatives and kin, and then incorporating the church into that, because it's part of the history. And as you say, it's the father's religion of many families. I'm a bit more confused about, you mentioned something about reconciling that and the indigenous spiritual thinking that doesn't have to be totally in conflict with Christian religion. I mean, there are so many oppositions in relationship to the land in terms of kinship, in relationship to bodies and to others, that I'm not sure how that bridging can happen.
Oh, I can tell you about that. There's really interesting things. Well, and this is a part of our traditions. So I had the great honor of working on the Métis Kinscapes project that's housed at the University of Alberta, the Native Studies faculty, and they investigate different sites of Métis religion, specifically pilgrimage sites. So Lac St. Anne is a really good example of this. Lac St. Anne County in Alberta, it's the site of the largest North American Catholic pilgrimage site, and it is predominantly Indigenous. So it's Métis, Nakota Sioux, Dene, Cree, all of us sharing land and territory together. And so as a site, it's a sort of site for peoplehood. People come, they make pilgrimages, they reconnect with relatives, they practice traditional practices, they learn languages, people harvest medicines, and they also attend Catholic Mass. All the different groups, they host different masses, usually in their own languages, and people are encouraged to participate in each other's cultural sort of representations of Catholicism. But the thing that's most interesting to me is the role that Saint Anne actually plays, because most people will call her Kukum Saint Anne. And when people talk about their relations to Saint Anne, they talk about her as the grandmother of everybody, that she's a figure that connects across all these different nations in like a very tangible way, the same way that you might have a relative in a different nation. Saint Anne, she's a sort of vessel for connecting more people. And she's the real focal point too. Like, it's obviously Jesus is, Mary is too, but the veneration of Saint Anne, it reflects the veneration that Indigenous communities have towards grandmothers. And in fact, when I was at Lac Saint Anne, someone told me that they think of Jesus as like a cousin, and that they're actually here. They're there to celebrate Jesus, but they're there to celebrate Saint Anne the most. And that's something that very easily projects onto people's other people's religious practices in their traditional ways as well. But yeah, that's just one example. There's so many other ways. And for my family specifically, like my grandmother, it's interesting. She identified herself as quite a devout Catholic, but when her siblings and her kids left the church or joined different churches, that didn't matter, provided they always came home for summer or for family dinner, because she kind of understood that your relatives can have relatives who are not your relatives, but they are still a part of your kinscape. So if someone joins a different religion or leaves yours, that doesn't sever the relationship. Religion is a tool to make connections, not break them. Or it should be.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. I can't speak for all Kahnawake Ronu, but I've been to the Mohawk Valley in Fonda, New York, many times to see the origins of Kahnawake and Katarita Kakwita, just out of interest more than anything else. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on people reconnecting to traditional values connected to people who are Dene and Lakota in that geographic area, and as they process religion, what will be the processing, or do you feel there will be a processing of rejecting Catholicism?
Oh, yeah, I think that, it's already happened, but it's interesting because, again, I would stress that you can be relatives with someone who's relatives with someone you're not related to. So that's what I see. That's something that I've witnessed in my own family and in other communities. There's plenty of people who are more geared towards traditional practices, plenty of people who skew a bit more Catholic, and plenty of people in between. And it's sort of this spectrum of practices and this diversity. And one of the things that I'm most interested in doing in my work is showing that that diversity has always been a part of Métis practices. Again, the way that the Métis have been represented by non-Métis scholars, which is unfortunately, that's been the vast majority of work done on the Métis until recently, there's always been a strong emphasis on Christianity, specifically Roman Catholicism. But there are other Christian churches that are a part of our heritage religions. Like my family names are mostly Scots-Irish, and the Presbyterian church has been a part of my family history for a long time. So these different Christian practices, they kind of melded together to create a new type of Christianity. And obviously Roman Catholicism is emphasized because of the role of support that Quebec had for the Northwest resistance, but it's something that has been overemphasized, that there has always been a diversity of practices. And it's been something, these religious traditions were able to coexist and live within the same kinscapes forever. Gabriel Dumont was a practicing Roman Catholic, but was also a pipe carrier. He had religious practices that spanned all the different nations that he was connected to. And so that's something I find that people are often, because they're coming from this point of having absorbed the misrepresentation, it's an idea of leaving the Catholic Church to go back. But these practices have always been there, working in tandem together. And I think that it's been really liberating for a lot of people to understand that they've always had the choice in their heritage religions, that it's something that we have always had the freedom to explore these all together or separately. It's been outside colonial categories that have tried to force us to practice just one or the other.
Hi, that was really interesting, and I would love to hear more about this too, because similar thoughts are on my mind.
Yeah, it's complicated though.
It is,
I'm not
yes.
I won't understate just how complicated it is.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I guess this question is more of an invitation for you to tell me more a little bit. So granted, I might have misunderstood your example earlier, but so you started off with a description of how when people come together, there's a set of practices and then a set of beliefs. And it seemed, from my perspective, that they were kind of separate. So there was more indigenous-based ways of living on the land, and then there was the Christian practices. Do you have an example of how these beliefs can interact with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one very key example actually is during the Northwest Resistance in 1885. For people who don't know this history, the movement actually took a sort of break from the Catholic Church, but still held the Catholic beliefs. And so people would do mass out on the land. People would pray and they would offer sacrifices, well, not sacrifices, they would offer tobacco offerings and pray in tandem during buffalo brigades. Again, this is things that people would adapt in their own ways always. The veneration of icons and saints has been a big part of Métis religion that doesn't happen just within the church, it happens in the home. The way that people engage with Cookham St. Anne especially, and Mary. And one of the most interesting things actually is looking through these old clerical records of non-Métis clergy being puzzled by a lot of these practices. For example, in missionary accounts, when they came to the Northwest in the 1840s, there were reports that Métis families were doing their own infant baptism, in lakes, in rivers, in lakes that held some other meaning, some previous, sort of sacred meaning. And again, people were doing this on their own. And so there's also often, when you look through these accounts, missionaries are often puzzled by Métis Catholicism, because on the one hand, they view us as very good Catholics because we were Catholic and venerated the saints, but then very bad, disobedient Catholics, because people wouldn't do this just in the church. They do it in their own home, they do it with their own families, they would baptize out in the lake without the presence of a priest. And so, yeah, the priests couldn't wrap their minds around the fact that this religion didn't belong to just the church. It had belonged to the people who had made it their relative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Now, our last participant will be joining us through Zoom. Maddison Schmitt is a citizen of the Red River Métis Two-Spirit local with deep roots in what is known as the Northwest. Born in Toronto and raised on the West Coast, Maddison has lived in Tiohtià:ke for 10 years. They are currently a master's student in the individualized program at Concordia, whose research creation thesis project combines site-specific performance art and creation practices with historical research methodologies to facilitate in-community collaborative creation practices. Maddison's recently co-facilitated an 8-week performance creation workshop series at the Centre Green in Westmount, co-presented by Tesserie Dunya Theatre, with folks who identified as BIPOC, immigrants, or new to Montrealers, and is honored to have been seen on tour lately as Louis Riel in Infinitèâtre, Louis Riel, a comic strip stage play based on the graphic novel by Montreal author Chester Brown. Maddison is passionate about telling their family and community's oral and recorded histories to ensure that their niece, Ramona, and those like her will have their own stories to carry with them into the future. Maddison's research project is titled A Pedestal for Uncle Mac, a Song for Ramona. Please welcome Maddison.
Excuse me while I share my screen. Hello, everybody. Let's hope it saved the settings. I think we're good. All right. Well, Tanshikiawa, bon après-midi. Adishun Kashun, Madison. Dishun Cowichan Valley, Vancouver Island. Ma famille, Dishun Kashun Kipling, Willette, Dupuis, Amelin, Ducharme, Marseille, and Corbeau. Miywâcimo Tiohtià:ke, Michifnia. This is my niece, Ramona. She's the granddaughter of hereditary chief Alec of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation on the west coast of Turtle Island. My general research question is, how do I mobilize awareness of urban, Indigenous, Two-Spirit, and/or queer epistemologies through site-specific performance? Here's an example of how this comes together in this case study where I imagine what all of that might mean to my niece, Ramona. If I went on a walk with Ramona through Montreal. Hey, Ramona, look over there. There's an empty pedestal there that's just waiting to be filled. It says it's for someone named Mac something. Oh, wow. You know, you and I, Ramona, we have an Uncle Mac, and he's someone worth honoring. Gilbert Mac Kipling was born in 1907 in St. Claude, Manitoba. On the left in this picture is his mother. In the middle is his nephew, my grandpa, and your great-grandpa. And that baby, that's my dad, your Opa. And this is a story about your Opa's brother, Mac. This is Mac's in our family tree. These are some census records. On the 1911 census, he's the youngest of 4 siblings, and the family's, quote, race or tribe is listed as Bengay, with Métis Canadian as the nationality. Their religion, Roman Catholic. They spoke French, according to the census taker. On the 1916 census, they're listed as Scotch, and although bilingual, primarily English. By 1921, the Kiplings have moved in with their brother-in-law, 3 families to a house with their daughter's family. In the middle of all these people is Gilbert Mac, with 9 months of school, who can read and write unlike his older brothers, including his brother Alfred, Opa's Opa. At age 24, Mac appears listed along with Alfred as having both been unemployed for over 20 weeks. Their brother Peter had died at age 26 in 1927, and their father John Kipling had died at age 80 in 1930. Mac would take a job as a truck driver and be employed for the 7.5 years before the war. When he was 32, that's younger than I am now, a big war broke out. They call it World War II, and Uncle Mac joined the army. He finished grade 5 in Manitoba French Country School at 15 years of age, after 3 years of intermittent schooling. He thought he was a big man and started working out, wishes he'd gone on in school. He likes to sit down and read detective stories and popular mechanics or play baseball or pool. He used to play the violin. He danced quite a bit when younger. Ready smile, clean, mature man, sober, likable manner, cheerful, congenial personality, wishes to drive a truck. Low average ability. Worked on a farm as a laborer. Pleasant, modest, quiet manner, suitable for overseas service. Uncle Mac's wife Annie's sister-in-law wrote to the government to ask that his mother be notified of his death. His wife was notified, but his mother wasn't, she writes. These are letters that were written by the government to tell his wife Annie that he'd been buried first and then reburied later. He was reburied in 1946. In the Grosbeek Canadian War Cemetery in the Netherlands. He was 38 years old. On the top left is the War Memorial in St. Claude, Manitoba. In the box on the bottom right is his name. This is the Canadian Virtual War Memorial, and on the bottom right is the page where his name is inscribed in the book, the Second World War Book of Remembrance. Merci, merci, thank you. Did it stop sharing? Yes, okay, good. I apologize for not being there in person. I have thrown out my back and I can't go very far.
Could I ask the first question? Hi, thank you for this great presentation. I just wanted to hear more about your personal connection to the story of Uncle Mac that you just presented. You mentioned something about age, well, a bit younger than you when this happened and this and that. And what is one or two things that at some point made a more, even if abstract or subtle, a more personal spark for you in the story?
Well, I grew up with my mom's family. So my mom's settler family, Doukhobor and Irish from the middle of Canada. And I was raised with my grandpa, who is actually 102 and lives in Montreal here with us today. And I was always very aware of him being in the war and coming home from the war, and I heard all the stories. But when it came to my dad's side of the family, the history had been lost. And so when I discovered in the archives that my great uncle had actually died in the war, my Métis great uncle, and that there were actually some monuments around the world for him. I could find information online. His war record was like a vast 40-page document. It was one of the first instances where I was able to see, and not just see on the census records, that they were unemployed or that they were uneducated or that they had moved around and had a hard time being in the same place, having a home. That was sort of all I could find for years and years and years about them. And then when I was able to uncover this war record that had things like he played the violin and he wished he'd been in school longer and he used to dance a lot and he read more, it just started to paint this really beautiful picture that I had never really had access to before. And so I was instantly sort of brought to this place of how do I then make sure that this is taught to my niece? How do I make sure that these stories are passed on? that they're not just lost because of trying to whitewash the families and what was happening with this 60s scoop and all of my dad's siblings and himself being adopted. Yeah, so it just sort of was a way for me to use my practice of collaborative, creative storytelling and to, I guess, apply it to what I've been doing academically more recently. Mhm.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. Just out of curiosity, is part of your research and part of your study to create or to help facilitate processes that will help other Indigenous people and Métis people in their tracing back histories and blending it with the oral family histories, and just maybe walk us through a little bit of the process part of it?
Yeah, so I came to Concordia a few years ago to do a second theater degree and in performance creation. This time my background been more as an actor and I did musical theater. And I had the opportunity to take part in a playback theater tour, which was happening last year with one of my professors, Elizabeth Couture, excuse me. And we were, so I went to 5 or 6 shows where we were entering into a community that was already, present, and we were asking them to tell stories. And then what the playback theater does in a nutshell is takes these improv forms and sort of takes the stories from the audience and then shares them back to them. And so I had seen 5 or 6 instances of this happening, and my role was to sort of make a report of it. And that process was really interesting for me over a period of a few months. The last couple shows were actually for uh, Black History Month and the community in the south of the island and of Montreal. And one of the things that really hit me was that this group of, these group of settler white women were welcomed into these communities. There were different protocols depending on where we were. There were different expectations, but part of the process was that they would go in and as they'd been invited into these communities, they would go in and they would have this process of explaining what it was they were going to be doing when the actual show was happening. And so people were more aware of what was going on. And I started thinking about how, in my own sort of collaborative, creative process, I already have a lot of tools that I would bring normally to the room in these kind of situations. But being more of an observer on this tour, I was able to see how delicate some of this was, and how there might be a better way of becoming involved with communities and creating with communities. And so in my own most recent personal experience with sitting in this 8-week workshop that I was running is to not a lot of like what Madeline was saying earlier was that it's just to invite and to bring whatever story is that speaks to you, that comes to mind. And then just create with that. And there can be placeholders. Like I do a lot of object theater. So a lot of times we'll ask people to bring in things that they can use as a placeholder for characters or for people or for stories or whatever. And then, sorry if I'm getting a little off topic now. I'm just trying to explain, give you a visual of what this might look like. And then together we would then be able to sort of create together this world, this represent this. I guess what I'm specifically interested in now for my thesis project is to bring it into my community of local, well, Montreal students that are all Métis. We have sort of made this group and are interested in working together to create collaboratively in situ site-specific performance that kind of brings our histories, brings our urban experiences into the light, and maybe retell some of the assumptions of what Indigenous experience in the world might be.
Thank you very much, Madison. Does anyone have any questions? Zoom? Perfect. So these are all really amazing presentations, and I think that's going to make the job very difficult for the judges right now. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break for the judges to go in a different room and deliberate. And when they come back, they'll give some comments on the presentations and announce the winners. So thank you, everyone, and just give us a 10-minute pause.
Oh, I was muted, so I'm going to say that all again. Everybody in the space, if you want to come back, we're almost ready to reveal the decisions of the judges, and also for those of you on Zoom as well. Come on back.
And my dad is kind of there now too, but they, like, my dad obviously went back, and like, every single day he spent there, he was like, they went to Catholic school, and they all went to the church, and that was how you knew everyone. And so, like, you're like, oh, it really was, even though, so it's horrible. There are also examples where it isn't what made it better. You should look at the Sacred Heart Church of First People in Edmonton. It is fine. Because when you see that church, you're like, okay, this is what it could be. Like that church, the people who work there, they don't come out and ask the church to apologize. And like very, very, really aggressive. I would watch the pilgrimage to Lac St. Anne, like they pushed it every year. We call what you have to do. This is the only way to start to prepare this. And they always, everything about that church is so cool. I mean, I don't know how much, if I listened to Edmonton, I probably still want to go. I would really go to Edmonton, but I would not. Because almost is, I think I'm more for she's my cousin. You know, could have St. Anne is a grandma, and that's awesome. I don't know how many people are actually going doing stuff, but I get why people do. And I like to support people who use it as like a co-working place. I would probably go to Lac St. Anne because it just feels really good. And like my sister, she can't go to the church, like it makes her feel so bad. But for me, I'm church. But one of the things too is that this is an interesting thing. Like growing up, people never questioned that Catholicism was a part of my religion. Everyone was like, oh yeah, Latin American. And people acknowledge like it's different than people would be like, oh yeah, it's Mary, the Virgin Mother, you guys go on something crazy stuff, right?
Would you want to talk from there or from up here? Would you want from over there? Okay. Perfect. All right, so welcome back, everyone. The judges have made a decision, so now I will pass it to them, and they'll give a few words, comments, and announce the winners.
First off, it's very difficult to be a judge in this event. It's the third time I've done it, and I would like to congratulate all three of the participants. I don't know if Madison can see us. Ellen and Madeline. The presentations were of extreme interest. Really, I want to say that. They were very, 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 very interesting and made it difficult to judge. I guess our challenge is to try to look for consistency and alignment with the judging criteria, you know, consistency that it's related to broad Indigenous perspectives and getting back to the communities and stuff like that. So it was very difficult for us to make the judgment, but we did the best we could. And again, congratulations to all three of you. The presentations were of extreme interest. I'll pass to Nicholas.
Thank you. Yes, you know, we just want to share some general comments that we found that the three presentations were quite, like there was a level of maturity and like piecing together, you know, research project, cultural grounding, personal experience, family stories, all of that. So it was very interesting and difficult to rank, but that's an institution, and that's what we have to do, rank. That's it. We can chat informally later about things we particularly enjoyed in each presentation.
Okay, so I guess I'll just reiterate some of the things that my co-judges have said. Yes, all three presentations were really interesting for me, and I really enjoyed the question and answer part of this too. I got to get a bigger sense of what you're actually interested in and how you want to go about doing that. So thank you, miigwech, to each three of you. I guess this is where I announce the winners. Okay, so I'll start with the first place winner, I guess, and all three of us decided that the first place would go to Ellen Dobrowolski. Oh, I'm not sure if I give this to you right away or how does this go? Sorry, congratulations. And I guess I'll continue with the second place winner. We decided that Madeline Montgomery would be second place. Congratulations. And just to round off the ranking system that we're all kind of uncomfortable with, but congratulations, Maddison Schmitt for third place.
So, just make sure you hear me. All right. So thank you all to the participants, Ellen, Madeline, and Maddison. And thank you, of course, to the judges. I know it's very hard to rank these presentations, and we do it the best we could, and we all know that these presentations were all amazing. Thank you to Fourth Space for hosting us for the third year in a row. It's always great to be here. And thanks to everyone that came to watch, and obviously to the Office of Indigenous Directions and Alan. And that wraps up today's event. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again next year.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming in for this truly amazing set of presentations, stories. Fantastic. Everyone online, and those of you in their space, thank you for your questions and your comments and your support. We're going to be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but just a quick reminder that the conversation stories remain available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit or share them. Please join us again. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.